All right, y'all. It is that time again. Phillip Carter here, 40 Watt Podcast coming at you. Going to take care of some business here before I get to our guest today that I'm super pumped about today because I'm going to grill him about all sorts of things, get him on the other side of the microphone for a change. I know he's a host of a pretty popular gear and music-related podcast. But first, before you go too far, make sure you check the information down below. Got a bunch of links down there. So you can find our Facebook, our Instagram, you can find our Patreon, patreon.com/40watt podcast, where you can support the show. I just mailed out a bunch of stickers and thank you cards to our current Patreon supporters. I really appreciate y'all. Y'all are helping me not lose money doing this, which is awesome. Not looking to make a ton of money doing this because it's not my day job. Reminder that I do donate 25% of my Patreon receipts to charity. First charity I'm going to donate to at the end of the year, whatever it ends up being, is going to be St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. And then I'm going to start branching out and going to other charities like the Delta Blues Museum Arts and Education Program in Clarksdale, Mississippi, that's educating blues musicians and kids in the area and getting guitars and drums and basses in their hands. So y'all be sure to, you can support me and support these charities at the same time, which is super awesome. Also, you're going to find all of my guest links down below, their social media. You're going to find links to their Patreon, their, what's the word? Podcasts. That was the word. That thing we're on, you know, words are hard. All right. All that's out of the way. Super excited. This week, we're talking to Blake Wyland of the Tone Mob. As you can see on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, please go to our YouTube channel and hit subscribe and get notifications and see what we're doing over there. Blake is also probably one of the busiest men in the backside of gear. Also a regular, I don't know if you're still called a guest anymore on the Chasing Tone podcast.
I don't think so.
I don't know anymore. So, but Blake is a busy man, and Blake also took some time recently to finally sit down and JFDI and record his EP that just got released. Look, and I'm going to let him talk about that. So, Blake, I'm going to give you something you're used to hearing other people answer. Give me the Reader's Digest version. How'd you get into guitar?
Oh man, yeah, that is quite the story. So I grew up, you know, my whole family was pretty musical. My grandpa played piano, you know, some of my earliest memories are sitting on his lap while he's, you know, they're banging out chords. And my dad always played acoustic. There was always music playing in the house, always playing music at friends' house, you know, and, you know, when I was probably, I don't know, maybe 9 or so, I went over to a friend's house and his older brother, who's just a couple years older than me, had a full band. And I was like, wait a minute, people can actually do this, you know. I'm used to a bunch of dudes sitting around the campfire, you know, playing acoustics, but I'm like, this is a full rock band, you know? And, you know, in retrospect, I mean, I could probably time travel back and they probably weren't that good, but to my 9-10-year-old brain, they were like, whoa, like amazing, right? And I was like, I just knew right then, I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this. And I, you know, I didn't know how. I didn't really know how to play anything at the time. I'd been taking a little bit of piano lessons by that point, but I wasn't sure how it was going to fit in the context of like a hard rock band.
Right.
And certainly as it got further along, you know, I started getting more into a little bit heavier music. And then, you know, one day, one of my buddies who was an excellent drummer was like, hey, I want to play the guitar. He's one of those guys that can just play anything, you know. He's like, why don't you play drums and we'll start a band? And so I got a drum kit and set it up in my bedroom. My parents' like 1,200 square foot, you know, regular, totally standard ranch house.
Oh, yeah.
And I started like trying to play things that were way too advanced. You know, I had no idea even how to like keep like a regular beat. And I'm like, I'm going to play this System of a Down song. It sounded horrible, but my mom put up with it for some reason.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's miracles in and of itself. The parents that put up with people learning instruments.
Oh man. I wouldn't let my kids do what my mom let me do. I just know I wouldn't have the patience for it. There's no way. I would like, we got to figure something else out. We got to do something else because it was bad in retrospect. She's in the kitchen. I've got my stereo absolutely cranked, playing a regular like acoustic drum set just as hard as I possibly can. not really knowing what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
it was bad. I'm a better drummer now, and I'm a terrible drummer still. So
Progress. We're all getting better. Right.
Yeah. And then I was continuing to take piano lessons this whole time, and that band thing never really went anywhere because I wasn't any good, and the other guys in the band weren't really that interested in it, but I still wanted to do it. And over time, I was taking the piano lessons, and I kept bringing my piano teacher these rock songs that were entirely guitar based. There was no piano in them, so she would show me like the chords and stuff. And one day she was like, "You're doing fine on the piano, but I think maybe you should try guitar." Like everything. Like, well, I guess that makes sense. And so I switched to playing guitar and learned "Smells Like Teen Spirit" on a family Takamine that'd been around for a long time, and kind of the rest is history. I knew that I was going to be playing guitar in some form or fashion. Got a little bit older and got together with that guy who talked me into playing drums as the drummer, which he should have always been because he's incredible. And we made this weird punk band and played at the high school battle of the bands, and it was a wild time. And I don't know, it's just been a huge part of my life ever since. So I knew I was at the time. I just didn't ever see myself having a career in music at all. Just didn't seem realistic to me.
Well, yeah,
and so I got into some.
We're talking that time period where everybody thought a career in music means you're a touring recording artist who's selling X number of albums a year. Like,
exactly.
Nobody knew that there were careers outside of that in music, or at least nobody talked about it. They existed. Nobody talked about it.
No, it wasn't on my radar at all. No, I wasn't thinking like, oh, you can be the engineer in a studio, or you can do X. I didn't know about that at all. I was like, that's just not feasible. I'm never going to be able to make that happen. I'm not cut out for touring life. All these reasons, And so I just got into some blue collar jobs, working on heavy equipment. Eventually found myself in the oil industry, and I was still like, they were good jobs. They paid well. They were solid careers, but I hated it. and still feel a little bit of guilt being like, I hated it so much, but I was really miserable most of the time. When I wasn't at work, I was great. Family life's great, all that stuff. I was playing music, I was doing other things. That was all wonderful. When I was at work, it was like, oh, I can't believe I'm just wasting I felt like I was wasting my time. I was like, I'm not doing what I should be doing. And
right.
And I started getting on social media. I didn't even have a Facebook page when I started the Tone Mob Instagram, and just found I had a knack for content creation and keeping people engaged just by accident. And I was studying a lot of online marketing people, mostly listening to their podcasts and just trying to understand some of this stuff. And started realizing I was having a lot of like, well, duh moments. Like some of these people would be on the podcast. I'm like, this is this guy, and he's an expert in this thing. And I'd listen to him talk. I'm like, well, that seems like common sense to me. It turns out I just had a knack for it. I don't know where it came from. I wasn't educated, and I just kind of innately understood some of this stuff. And the Instagram kept growing, and eventually I was like, well, there's not like an interview-based podcast for any of this stuff at the time that I was aware of. And I was like, I found the Ringer app that let me record on my phone. And I recorded the first like 60 or 70 episodes at work on the clock. Like it's one of those jobs where you're either like running around like a maniac where you have no time to even sit down and eat lunch, or
right.
You're literally waiting for the clock to run down and the other shift to get there, and there's nothing to do. There was really very little in between. And so on those days where it was like, okay, you guys are in here watching fail videos on YouTube, I'm gonna sneak over here to this corner of the site and to record a podcast. And so I was able to get it off the ground that way. And yeah, it grew and grew. I started doing the Chasing Tone podcast with Brian Wampler after, I think, a little bit after episode 100, and I think we're now on 340 something. Yeah. I don't know. And kept doing my thing, and yeah, working with a bunch of companies in different capacities, and yeah, now I work way more than I ever did, but I love it, so it's way better.
Yeah, it's a totally different ball game what you're doing
nutshell
now.
Version, I guess.
Yeah, it's the whole not being fulfilled by what you were doing. It's not that it was bad work or that it isn't work that needs to be done or there's anything bad about it. It's just that it wasn't for you. It's not what you were passionate about doing. And so
no, I didn't care at all.
Yeah, exactly. it pays the bills, but it's not fulfilling. So
yeah, exactly.
No, I feel that. So the podcast game has blown up. Obviously, I mean, I bothered to start a podcast during the pandemic last year. I'd actually intended to start it before the pandemic, but I had scheduled and was going to do a bunch of interviews to start the podcast at a blues festival that I go to every year that I love. It's my favorite music festival, and I've been to a whole bunch of them around the country. But it's called the Juke Joint Festival in Clarksdale, and COVID shut it down. So I sat around and was like, well, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. And then so finally started recording. So it's blown up now. When you started it, 2015-ish?
Yep.
That's 6 years ago. There wasn't that much out there. Like, I didn't listen to a lot of podcasts back then either because there just really wasn't a thing. They had existed before, back when it was on the iTunes platform, and I listened to a couple, but it's like, it didn't hold my attention. I was on, watching YouTube all day, but then I started getting into gear podcasts, and I realized, there's people doing this around things I'm really, really interested in. I don't have to hear about international politics to find a podcast to listen to, or, because that seemed to be a thing. People love talk politics on podcasts, and they're very opinionated, and I just don't care about any of their opinions. I don't care what their party is. So you get into this. You found that you had a knack in marketing and online marketing, and I had a thought when you were telling this story. See what you think. So I went to school for music and audio engineering. We talked about it earlier. I have this belief that those that are good at those things just do it. And then those that go to school for it are trying to learn the things that those people showed work. That makes sense?
Yeah. It's marketing especially is kind of unique, especially now. Everything's changing so fast. And it's a weird thing. So I'm not going to say that it has no value whatsoever.
Right.
But I wonder if the value that people place upon it monetarily, like what it costs to get into it, you probably could have just like tried a bunch of things by that point. Maybe it even came out a little bit cheaper and learned the same things. But also, in my own experience, there was a company that I worked with for a long time that hired somebody who was being paid, I don't remember exactly what the number was, and I didn't have any like confirmation on what it was, but after he was let go, he was paid over $200,000 a year. Whew. And this guy didn't know what he was doing. Quite frankly, like he really didn't. I don't know how he got hired. He came from a completely different industry that was, not focused on direct to consumer and not focused on like, the way things work on the internet these days. Right. And his ideas, like the things he were putting out, I'm like, this looks like a mattress company's, like 4th of July sale ad, for something in the music industry that has specific branding and specific elements to it. I'm like, this is just terrible. And it was all and I finally like had to talk to the owner. I'm like, I'm not like trying to like take this guy's job because I was already getting paid what we had agreed upon and I was already working with him. But I'm like, he's actually more hassle. He's making things harder. We have to keep going back and correcting him. And I was like, I had no idea what he was getting paid at the time. Right. And he had all of the paper, right? He had all of the everything. He did not know what he was doing. Mm-mm. He did not.
I feel like you're talking about the former CEO of Gibson, but
I mean,
Sorry, Gibson. I love you. I really do.
no, I wish I would love to do some stuff with Gibson, but
Yeah,
no, it
that'd
was
be
a
cool.
smaller company, but it was just like, man, that based on, and I know not everyone that goes to school is that guy, but based on
Right.
my experience, it was like, come on, man, like it was weird. It was so strange. He was so incompetent. It was very, very weird.
It's one of those things maybe where, the guitar or music industry, contrary to popular belief, it's such a niche market. It's such a small thing that maybe he kind of fell through the cracks because, people go to school for marketing. Most of them don't go in thinking, yeah, I want to do musical instrument marketing.
Right.
So he, fell down the tier of jobs until he got to one that was like, oh, people with credentials don't normally apply here.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It could be. It could be. It was just funny because the first time I talked to him, I got off the phone and started talking to my partner, and I was like, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. Do you? He's like, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. I was like, but they hired him for a reason. We'll work with him and see what happens.
Yeah.
And as it went, it just became more and more apparent. I was like, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Exactly.
And so it very well could have been what you described. I have no idea how he got hired.
It's funny, those situations where you find someone in a situation who does a job and you feel like they must have gotten hired for a reason. And then they tell you something and you're like, I don't think they know what they're talking about. At that point, there's only two paths this can take. Either he knows something you don't and he's a genius, or he's an idiot.
Yeah,
Or
pretty
she,
much.
Either way. There's no, he's pretty decent at this. At this point, when you don't think they know what they're talking about, they're either on another level or they're awful. So it's interesting. So that's what you're doing now. You're working in the music industry. I want to talk about your EP. So you finally, I'm co-opting a phrase from that pedal show a few weeks ago, put out a video where Mick was talking about JFDI, and that is just fucking do it. So you finally did it. You finally got the EP knocked out. I know you've talked about that a little bit on your podcasts, and there may be some overlap in my listeners and yours, so they may know some of the story, but let's talk about that, and then I've got feelings I need to share.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it's not the first piece of like recorded music that I've been a part of. My band put something out in 2015, I think, 2014, 2015. We because we were all working those same type of jobs, and I had to put my scheduling in, or my vacation time in a year in advance at that job. So I was like, hey, we really want to record, like go into the studio and record a proper record and just do it right. We've kind of done little bits and projects here and there. We just want to like make one cohesive project and do it right. And so we did. We made kind of this 90s inspired thing I'm still really proud of, but it was a very much a group effort. And that's cool. But I'd never done anything myself. I'd never done anything where I called all the shots. I did every single piece of it. And I always kind of wanted to, but I just was like, I don't know what that'll look like. I'll do that someday. And then late 2020, I mean, really through the entire podcast, but it really started hitting home in late 2020. My guests were coming on and like, man, if you can, one in particular is my friend Devon Blue. He came on one time and he was like, if you can make stuff, if you have the ability to say something, the ability to create something, and the means, and like you can do it, you kind of have an obligation to do it. And it was like, oh, you got me. Like, I'm surrounded by all these creative tools. I'm so spoiled for like having tools of creativity like beyond my wildest imagination, and I wasn't really utilizing them outside of showing people what they sounded like, which is valuable. They're like, yeah. I mean, I just did a pedal demo yesterday. Like, that stuff I find super valuable as a consumer, and I want to keep doing that too. But I hadn't really made music just for the sake of making music in years. And it really kicked off on January 6, 2021, we had some madness happen in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think that left everybody, regardless of their stripe of political affiliation, feeling pretty disappointed and pretty upset for the most part. And I was really taking that to heart. It was hitting me really hard, but it felt real hopeless. And it was like, what can I do? And I was like, I don't know. I just kind of went out to this shed and threw a bunch of effects together. And I was just like, I'm just going to zone out for a little bit. And I was like, and I do this all the time. Like, this is a thing that I do. And I was like, oh, the mics are already set up. Well, let me just set up a session here, and I'll record it and see what happens. And I got done with it. And I went back and listened to it. And I was like, is that me? Did I do that? That's really weird. Like, that's really strange. Like, I felt like somebody else did it. And I went in and showed my wife, and she's like, wow, that's really intense and really, really strange. I'm like, yes, this is not music that I listen to, but it's undoubtedly music,
Right.
and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And she said something to the tune of, she's like, maybe it's not what you listen to, but maybe it is what you do. Like, huh? I never really thought about it that way. Every other piece of music I tried to create, I was like, I'm gonna make this a country-ish song. I'm gonna make this
Right.
a XYZ song. And then I never really just stepped back and I'm like, let's just see what happens. I'd never done that before. And so I did that with every song on the EP. I was like, let's just see what happens. Like, I think this combination of stuff sounds cool, and we're just gonna go with it and see where the muse takes us. And once I got a few things done, I thought, it'd be. I talked to Joe Branton from the Guitar Nerds on an episode of the Tone Mob, and he was talking about the process he was going through on some of the Polymath records. I was like, I think I want to incorporate some of those elements too. So I did a bunch of field recording and then tried to assemble everything in one listening experience, which again was kind of a weird thing. I'm like, it's like 1 33-minute track, basically.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be like something you sat down and absorbed and like tried to formulate a story in your head. I have a story in my head, and I wanted to hear what it painted for people. And getting the different things back from everyone, it's so wildly different. There's one guy that's really close to what I have envisioned, but I haven't actually put anything out there saying like what I had in my head yet, because I may not. I might. I'm not sure. I've thought about making a comic book. I've thought about a couple different things, but I really like hearing what it creates for people, because it's wildly different.
So I'm going to pause you
person.
here, and a thought on that. I'm going to give an opinion. I read. Have you ever read The Giver by Lois Lowry?
Not in a long time, but I'm familiar with it.
A lot of people tend to read it in middle school, elementary, maybe not elementary, but at least middle school, late elementary.
It was elementary
maybe.
school for me. Yeah.
Somehow I missed that. Somehow that never happened for me. Like, I don't know if like the schools I was in, they had substituted it or something. I never read it. So I read it as an adult for the first time. And that book had this like profound effect on me. And the point though is that there's this point at the end of the book, and by the way, it's a popular thing on my podcast. We end up talking about books of some kind. It just always. I'm a librarian. It happens. So the end of this book, there's this. It ends ambiguously, and where you've got to make a decision whether the protagonist at the end lives or dies, and the way you view it says a lot about you, and it's this introspective moment, right? Your EP is sort of the same thing. I think it's a good idea to let people make up their own mind, because later on, Lois Lowry wrote a follow-up story to The Giver in which you find out whether he lived or died, and I sort of wish that second story never existed, because it was so much more interesting when you didn't know. When you had to make inferences based on the way it made you feel. So I think it's a smart move to leave it ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what my gut has told me to do as it's moved on. Some people have been like, "No, I really want to see like what you do with the comic," and I'm like, "Man, that might ruin it. It might ruin it for some people. And I don't even know if I want to tell the one guy who I'm thinking of who got really close. I don't even know if I want to tell him. Right. You know, because I have this text chat that goes along with the podcast, and so we're talking about this stuff all the time. A lot of people are like, what is this thing? And I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's literally, you get to text. It's not my personal phone number, but it goes to an app that comes right to my phone.
Right.
And so it's literally, we're just texting back and forth all the time on there. And so, you know, people text into that number and they're like, oh, I got this feeling from it. I got that. And we just have a conversation about it. But the one guy in particular, I was reading through his feelings and I was like, wow, you really got close. But I don't know if I want to tell him.
Right.
I don't know if I do.
Let him have it. Let him have it and not know how close he was. It just means his experience is at least in some way similar to yours.
Mm-hmm.
I had such a neat way to do a thing. And for those of you that haven't listened to it yet, you really need to go and listen. It's like, listen to it all the way through. Don't try to listen to it in tracks. I agree. Don't try to listen to it in multiple tracks. Just sit and listen to the whole thing. And it's going to, so this is where I'm going to tell you my feelings a little bit. Not like go into like some crazy story that I built up. I need to listen to it again, honestly. But so I work late sometimes, and I work in a public library. And I was working late the night that you put it out. And so I'm by myself in this 16,000 square foot giant building. I say giant, it's a pretty good sized building.
I mean, that's big. Yeah.
It's a big building. I was literally installing library shelves. Like that's what I was doing that night. And it's like midnight. I'm still at the library working, you know. Big buildings, big old buildings, especially libraries, are creepy anyway to me because my imagination gets the better of me. And so I'm listening to your EP at midnight in the middle of a public library at, you know, it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable. There were whole parts of it where, because there's a lot of dynamic in it. And so it goes from big to really, really tiny to almost silence at points. And some of the silent points, I was like, was that the track? Or is that someone here? What is going on? So it's why I need to go back and re-listen, because I was sort of distracted by just how unnerving it was by myself in this big empty building, you know, after dark, listening to what was music born out of an uncomfortable situation. And I was uncomfortable listening to it. I listened to it. I thought it was fantastic. But that was just the experience of it. It was really, really different. I understood what you meant when you said it's not the stuff you listen to, but maybe it's what you create. But yeah, so I've been meaning to message you and actually tell you what I thought of it. Just had not had a chance. So now I get to do it in an audio recording. That's great. It's the second time you've creeped me out while I'm working late, by the way.
Second time.
First time.
When's the first time?
The first time was you released that 3-hour episode. I think you were talking to Yvette Young. Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And y'all decided to spend the entire episode talking about terrible road stories, ghosts, and aliens. I was like, which I love. Typically I love, but also typically I'm not at a library at 2 a.m. by myself. So
yeah, sleep paralysis. That was a big topic on
sleep
that
paralysis. Ooh. Yeah, that one had me. So
yeah, that was a fun one. I didn't know we were going to go there, but I'm glad we did. It was it was pretty wild.
Yeah. So the back to EP just before I get distracted and get us way off topic. Mm-hmm. So you put it out on your podcast. Like, yes, that's interesting. That's different. What was what possessed you to do it that way instead of going straight to Spotify or something like that?
Well, so I have had this theory for quite a while, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And as I've gotten more and more connections in the music industry, some of the people I get the good fortune to talk to are people who, like, they already have an audience. They've been successful in music for several years as an artist. And I've been trying to talk a lot of them into this concept. I'm like, listen, Spotify, like even especially now, specifically with Spotify, you listen to music and podcasts in the same app. they're delivered the same way. They're a audio file that is hosted somewhere and streamed to your ears. Often, like I said, oftentimes through the exact same app that you're already in. And so I was like, why couldn't somebody who already has an audience, especially somebody who's like has an audience for their own music, why couldn't they create their own podcast? You've seen how you can create a podcast. Yep. It's not super that easy. Difficult to set up and get it going. It's difficult to get people to listen to it, but it's not difficult to start.
Yeah.
So why couldn't somebody who already has an audience, like they, think about like your average like mid-level touring band, they constantly are like, oh yeah, go listen on Spotify, buy my vinyl over here. Oh, Bandcamp, free Bandcamp Friday. They're used to like pushing people to different platforms already to check out their stuff. It's not weird. So my thought was, what if you were able to put it out as a podcast? And for my format, it was a little bit easier because it was intended to all be listened as one piece. And my people were already used to listening to me for at least an hour. Right. So the format kind of made sense. But I even thought of like, if you did do a traditional record or an EP, you could get a sponsor, something hopefully related, but doesn't necessarily have to be. My sales pitch was always like, imagine how game-changing it would be if Taylor Swift put out an album as a podcast independently and had it sponsored by Pepsi or something like that. Like, it would break the system. Like, it would absolutely change the game.
It's a major disruptor doing it that way.
Yeah. And so I was like trying to talk these bands into like, I've got connections, I got people, we can make this happen, we can figure this out. It won't be the Taylor Swift level thing, but it can start to create some waves. And everybody's response was like, that's a cool idea, but I just don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I finally got to a point where I was like, I committed to making the record, and I just planned on doing it the normal way. And I was like, well, I'm not known for making music, but I can test this hypothesis. And so I hit up Sweetwater literally the week before I released it, and was like, I mean, I already have a relationship with them, so it's a little different. But I was like, hey, what do you think about this? And the guy that I work with over there was like, absolutely. Like, this sounds awesome. 100% in. And like, he's like, he literally had the money wired to me within the hour.
That's amazing.
And I was like, whoa, okay. I guess this has some merit. Let's do it. And and like, it's not a game-changing amount of money or anything. It's not like I got millions of dollars. But like I've told some people, I would have to get hundreds of thousands of streams to equal this. And it was super, super easy. They were super into the idea, and they were really happy with the results. And it's I don't know how long it's been since it came out now, but I signed up with them. Like, it'll be here exclusively for 3 months. After that, it's going to all the other platforms and doing a vinyl release and all that jazz. So it was so successful, even at the small scale. They were immediately, my guy over there was like, if you want to have other, like, people of your level, I guess, and with audiences of a similar size, if other people want to do that with you, or even you can talk bigger names into do it, he's like, we will sponsor other people's music to be released on your podcast in the same way.
Oh, that's too cool.
And I was like, dude. And so we've already got a plan. Me and Devon are going to do it here in about a month, and it's going to be a little bit different format than what we just did.
Yeah.
But I think people are really going to enjoy it. And he just said, like, they were really behind the idea, and I hope more artists can like see this as an opportunity to do things just a little bit differently. And the beauty of it is, it doesn't change. Like, you can still do the other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You're not doing this exclusively. You don't have to completely shift your model. You're adding an avenue. Yeah.
And it gets complicated, when you get like multiple songwriters and you have to figure out all those splits. But I think it's doable. I know it gets complicated, but
yeah.
And you've heard me like rag on labels a lot, but Like, that is what labels are for, is to figure all that stuff out. There's no reason that a release couldn't go that way and have all that stuff dialed in if that's too much for an independent artist to figure out on their own, which I could understand. But if you've made all the music, if you produced everything yourself or with like one or two other partners, pretty easy.
Yeah,
pretty simple.
We're seeing a market where, and it's interesting because, and I went on the Spotify like rant a little while back. I do Spotify. I pay for Spotify Premium. I'm not going to pretend to be one of those people who doesn't stream, right? But I also make it a point, if I like a band's music, I'm going to try to buy their vinyl or a t-shirt or something else. You know, I don't buy CDs anymore. I need to take a picture at some point of my incredibly obscene stash of CDs that are all in boxes and put away because I never listen to them anymore. Everything's streamed or on vinyl. And so if I'm going to listen, I'm going to listen in those formats. But streaming has completely, I'm going to be absurd. Streaming has done for artists what translating the Bible into English did for the classical Catholic Church. Like, it took away their power. It took away the biggest thing they had. And so when you took away the distribution market from labels, I think, not that they don't still have merit and attributes that are good and can be helpful, but I think you took away the biggest barrier for independent artists doing it on their own. Suddenly they could distribute globally easily.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're finally seeing that. It's interesting. I was in school at Middle Tennessee State University, in the recording industry management program there at MTSU, when like streaming started to come together, like when Pandora started to kick off, right? This is post Napster, post LimeWire, all the RIAA lawsuits and all that stuff, you know, that was happening then. And watched, I watched EMI fold, which, you know, they had the Beatles, you know, and I watched them fold because suddenly they weren't selling records anymore and they couldn't adapt fast enough. And we're seeing the 15 years down the line what's happening. And artists are able to take more control of their music. They're able to do it on their own. We've seen a complete shift in the role of the record label. I think it's awesome. And I think we're just, the whole idea of podcasts doing it, that's just another shift. And to tie it back a little bit of full circle in the marketing thing, you go to school to do marketing, you go to college for 4 years. Well, guess what? The marketing world's not the same as it was when you went in 4 years ago. And your program didn't adapt fast enough. So guess what? You're going to have to educate yourself when you get out anyway.
And it literally can't adapt that fast.
Exactly.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. And it's no fault of the program. It just can't do it. It can't keep up. The books can't get published fast enough to teach these courses.
It's like trying to steer a giant ship.
Yeah.
It's like, can we turn this aircraft carrier at the same rate as a speedboat? No, you can't.
No,
you physically can't do it.
It's impossible. So you've got to be able to adapt. You've got to be able to go on the fly. You've got to be a little intuitive about it, which is what you were when you first started out. You were just intuitive about it. You just saw things, said, okay, it needs to go this way. It works. I get frustrated because I know how much of a problem with streaming is, to the point that I have a t-shirt in my Teespring store right now. By the way, my Teespring link is down below. I forgot to mention that earlier. Grab a t-shirt, grab a something. I may even have baby onesies at some point. That's a thing they offer. So whatever, I'll have it.
Yeah. Why not print it on everything?
Exactly. Print it on everything. But I have a t-shirt that says, buy vinyl because streaming doesn't pay shit. It's like, because it's so true. But I also think that it's the greatest tool that's been handed to artists, independent artists.
Yes.
And so it's such a double-edged sword. I love that there are people out there fighting for better streaming rights, like Taylor Swift, someone who's got a name. I know we just mentioned her earlier, but she's got the name and the clout to really kind of muscle around the big labels about streaming rights. So maybe it gets fixed.
Well, and it's so funny because we operate in the music realm and there's so much conversation around streaming and how unfair it is. And I've said this before, and this kind of ties into like, why did you release it as a podcast? You know, some people have messaged me and they're like, does it matter if I listen to your podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever? Do you get paid more when I listen on those platforms? I'm like, you know how much per stream a podcast gets paid? $0
Yep,
and
$0.
cents per stream.
I get paid
unless you figure out how to do it. And I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
I knew that going in, but I'm just saying, like, and I'm not comparing a podcast creation to the level of thought and talent that goes into a good song. But, you know, it's just funny that there's that misconception there. And that's part of why I was like, well, maybe we can figure this out. Maybe we can figure out a way for this to make sense. And you know, things are a little bit different for me now, and it's still not 100% the same, but you know, you can monetize podcasts similar-ish to YouTube now, depending on what platform you're on.
Right.
But it's still kind of a funny format. It's still, because of that though, because of there's no direct centralized monetization strategy like YouTube, it gives us a lot more freedom.
That's
so
very true.
That's why I love the medium so much. So yes, everyone, if you've been wondering, podcasters don't get paid per stream. So
yeah, if that's a question, if you were curious, now the podcasters that are on YouTube and are monetized, which I am one of those two things. You can, if you're watching this on YouTube, you know which one, not monetized. But yeah, it's, you do this, you don't make money. You make money from advertising and sponsorships and Patreon, of which, I'm not even 6 months into this. I'm doing it for fun. That's why I mentioned that about my Patreon earlier. I have a job I love and I make money, and this isn't my full-time gig. So I like being able to give some of that money away to places that I feel like it's fit to go. But if you get tired of podcasters, you know, the sponsorships on their podcasts, if that bothers you, one, we need to have a deeper conversation. Two, support them on Patreon. Seriously, because they're not getting paid per stream. In a lot of ways, we actually don't know how many times our podcasts are actually streamed. That's something I came to realize from my platform, is that I can see downloads. Downloads don't mean plays.
it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It depends on where you're hosted. So the way I've understood it from talking to people that are deeper into the podcast world specifically, a stream and a download, we've been conditioned to talk about them as downloads because traditionally that's what they were. You had to download them back in the day, literally to your iPod, which is why it's a podcast. And that was how you assumed that somebody listened to it. Like you said, a download and a listen is not necessarily the same thing. So somebody could download it and they could listen to it 12 times potentially.
Yeah.
You know, and if somebody does indeed download it, that is it will be counted as one download no matter how many times they listen to it. That said, from my understanding, a stream counts as a download. So if you stream through Spotify 12 times, you're going to get counted as 12 downloads.
Oh, that's good
the way I understand it.
Well, see, that's good to know then.
Yeah,
and it's a wild world out there as far as podcasts go. There's lots of them. They pop up all the time. New ones pop up. It's not a hard thing to do. If you've thought about making a podcast, you should do it. If you need pointers, feel free to reach out to me. I will be happy to help. I don't mind. I think it's fun. 40wattpodcast@gmail.com. Send me a note. I'll tell you what I did. It's super easy. So I'm going to shift gears here a little bit.
Okay.
Before we lose everybody who's into guitar gear and not into podcast behind the scenes stuff. So NAMM. Let's talk about NAMM.
Let's talk about NAMM.
So you've been to several NAMMs. I've never been to NAMM. If Summer NAMM happens, it'll be the first time I've been to a NAMM, period. I still say if, because even though they've got it listed on the website, and we know for a fact a couple of medium to large size guitar folks are going to be there, I think it's still iffy if whether it's going to happen or not. And I don't think it's because of COVID. I don't think that's the iffy part.
I think it's so Summer NAMM in particular is kind of a weird beast.
Yeah.
First of all, I love Nashville. I don't really like Anaheim that much. I love Nashville, the town, deeply. I have a great time when I'm there. I have a lot of homies down there, and I love Nashville. It's where I would move if I moved out of the Pacific Northwest.
Same. If I moved out of Mississippi, it'd be to Middle Tennessee. Again, I went to MTSU. I love that region. It's beautiful. It's musical. I think it still doesn't feel huge, even though it is huge. Anyway, I digress. I will go on a rant about Nashville love. It's nuts.
Yeah. I love that place. And so, all that said, without question, nearly every company that I talked to, prior to COVID, it was always the question mark was like, well, NAMM in general was a question mark, but Summer NAMM was the big question mark because it's like, it's not that expensive compared to Winter NAMM.
Right.
But it's also even less effective, generally speaking, than Winter NAMM. There's very few people that I've talked to about Summer NAMM that said, yeah, I got a tremendous amount of business out of that. In fact, the answer is usually, that was not worth doing.
Yeah.
And so, I personally love the NAMM shows because I like hanging out with all of these people that I talk to on the internet all the time or on the phone all the time. And seeing them in person and getting to hang out, that's the best part. I love that part of it. But from a company owner's perspective, so I just talked to Josh Scott about this pretty in depth on Tone Mob. He's like, before, like last Winter NAMM, he got done. Well, I don't think he's ever done Summer NAMM. If he did, it was he hasn't done it since I've been in the industry.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. But he got his stuff packed up from Winter NAMM. He was sitting in the car with his crew, and he's like, we're not doing this next year. And that was before COVID.
Yeah.
Well, technically, COVID had happened. We weren't really aware of what was going on at that. Yeah. So he was like, we're not doing this next year. It was like $55,000. For what? Like, they wanted to charge me. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but the number that sticks in my head was around $8,000 to do an hour or 2 hour pizza party in one of the rooms up top at Winter NAMM.
It's so absurd.
I was like, no, I'll pay a couple $100 and do it on the sidewalk outside. Like, I know it's not quite the same thing. It's a little run and gun, but I was like, this is ridiculous.
And it's worth noting, especially in the JHS case, we're talking the NAMM that happened just a little over a year ago. He's already knee deep in his YouTube channel that's taken off like crazy. You know what I mean? It's not like he needed NAMM.
No,
he didn't need it.
And I would argue that very few people do.
Yeah.
It can be a thing to do. I mean, it's kind of weird because like at some scales, it's like, okay, it could be really beneficial depending on your goals and how you do it. It could be. But my answer has always been like, okay, let's say the minimum budget to do Winter NAMM, Summer's a little different. But Summer's just so ineffective, it's almost not worth talking about in that case. Winter NAMM costs basically what I can gather about $8,000. Bare minimum to be there, unless you split a booth.
Sure.
But if you're doing it on your own, it's going to be about $8,000 at the bare minimum. Most people say 10. Could I figure out a way for a gear company in 2021 to spend $10,000 more effectively and get in front of more people and get eyeballs on their product more effectively? Yeah, almost guarantee you that I could figure that out. Yep. And I'll take $1,000 to do it, and then you can spend the other $9,000, and you'll get way more reach.
Yep.
Way more effective reach that you can actually measure and see the results from, instead of, well, hope that dealer calls me in a month and a half. That's the thing.
And so
it's weird.
I saw this and have seen this growing a little bit, not in the music world, because obviously I've never been to a NAMM. I don't know these things, but excuse me. I have worked with state and national library associations, and we do conferences. There are state conferences, there are national conferences, there are regional library conferences. Yes, y'all librarians go to conferences and we talk about more than books in the Dewey Decimal System. I'm going to go ahead and nip that in the bud before that shit gets started. There's actual things to talk about. I'm going to do a library podcast and give people a peek behind the stacks and see what actually happens in public libraries that nobody talks about, nobody knows about. We're not all volunteers. Nothing in the library is free. Done. So, neither here nor there. I worked on the committees that handled the exhibit halls, the vendor halls, for national conferences, and I see the amount of money in just library conferences that these vendors are paying for booth space in these halls. And then these vendors, not only are they showing up at the big national conference, they're showing up at the smaller national conferences. They're showing up at the little regional conferences. If you're lucky, they're showing up at your state conference. And it's astronomical amounts of money for very little return. And I was hearing whispers from them that the conference model, the exhibit hall model, just doesn't make sense anymore. I was hearing that from them 4 years ago. It doesn't generate, and it makes sense in the music world that we're seeing the same thing. It doesn't make sense to generate. It used to make sense when we weren't so connected. We didn't have all these mediums in which we could communicate. You needed to sit in front of this dealer in, I don't know, Reno, Nevada, needed to actually sit down with the distributors and the companies that come out of Osaka, Japan, and they needed to sit down and hash out deals because you could only do so much by mail and telephone. But now it doesn't make sense. It's too much money. There's so many better ways that money can be spent, either in advertising and product development. You could split that money into so many other avenues. So it makes total sense that we would see them start to look at other avenues. And Summer NAMM, like you said, I wish Summer NAMM were the only NAMM, then I could actually go regularly, and it's in Nashville because I love Nashville. It's been a long time since I've been to Anaheim. I don't know that I'll ever go back to Anaheim. Nothing against Anaheim if I have any listeners from that area. It's just, it's not my place. I'm not a Southern California person. It's just not my thing. I spent 2 weeks out there playing some gigs with a band I was in, and just not my thing. It was fun. The beach was fun, I guess. I have such an irrational fear of sharks. I tried to have fun anyway. So I wonder, and here's my question, the big one I thought of when I knew we were going to talk about this. So Summer NAMM to me is a question mark. But if it happens, do you wonder if maybe it's a litmus test for whether or not Big NAMM is going to really be like, it's a litmus test for not only NAMM, but for manufacturers to see if it's something they're ever going to do again, or if it could be like last gasps.
Yeah, it's tough because Winter NAMM, like, arguably has always been more effective, like I said, even though it costs way, way more.
Right.
I think Winter NAMM will stick around in some way, shape, or form. I do. I think enough people have it as kind of a vacation. Not necessarily the people working there, but a lot of the attendees are like, I'm going to NAMM. Like, I know that was my first NAMM experience. It was like, I'm going to NAMM. Let's go hang out and woo, So I think that there is room in the market for an event like that. Summer NAMM, I think if it happens, I honestly think it's going to be a ghost town.
Yeah.
I think there will be people there. I just don't think that, I don't think there's going to be that many manufacturers that end up showing that make it financially feasible for NAMM to put it on.
Yeah.
No,
that's
I could be wrong
thing.
about that. I mean, and things could progress much quicker, and people could change their mind between now and then. But they keep pushing the date for signups. Usually it's like, you need to be signed up by this time, or else you're not getting a booth. They're like, well, actually, now it's this time. Well, now it's this time.
Yep. And
keep pushing it
for
further.
General attendance hasn't even gone out yet.
Yeah. So I don't know that it's gonna happen. It might have enough interest that at the level that a smaller local guitar show would, like the Tacoma Guitar Show up in Washington or something like that I've been to. It might have enough interest like that, but I don't know if that's enough interest to make it a financially feasible event for the NAMM organization to put on.
Right.
So that might kill it. But if that dies out, I don't know. Like I said, Summer NAMM's always been such a big question mark. It's hard to know if it's just a symptom of Summer NAMM always being kind of unnecessary on top of COVID. I think Winter NAMM's probably still going to happen. I think it might be a little bit scaled back, but my gut is that it happens in 2022 and is probably really similar to what we've experienced in the past.
Okay.
That's my assumption. But it might. I think that there will be a lot of companies, JHS being one of them, and I guess I don't want to speak for the other ones that I know for a fact are in the same boat, but since he talked about that publicly, I feel like that's okay.
Yeah.
But there's some others that are similar size that are like, nope, we're not going back regardless.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of heavy talk behind the scenes of doing what we've discussed on my podcast of like, let's all just get together and do something ourselves. Let's make it cooler. Let's have everybody come to Portland and we'll line up food trucks and we'll have a whole thing and the public can come in for $5 and actually buy pedals there and buy stuff there and like have it be fun, have it be a good time.
Yeah.
And way less expensive.
A giant cool guitar show instead of the big, music merchandisers mess that it is, where they can't sell anything. All they can do is make deals to sell things later.
Right.
It's like, we're going to sell you this, but we're going to do it in a month.
That's right. Not now.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I kind of understand to a degree.
Yeah.
It's not what it's an old event.
Oh,
it's been around for forever.
Started in like New York as like piano manufacturers or something like that. I used to know the history. I don't remember it.
It's something like that. And it just evolved over time into this huge thing that it is now. And I think it's time for it to evolve again. And I think that evolution needs to take the connectivity and the prices that they've been charging for years they're just not sustainable.
Yeah.
You can't charge some independent podcast $8,000 to have a room for 2 hours. That's ridiculous.
That's
not going to happen.
That's exactly right. That's completely absurd. And if it's anything like you're saying, whether it's financially feasible, for example, these conferences I'm talking about, they're funded almost entirely based on that exhibit hall, getting vendors in, paying those outrageous booth prices. That's where the funding comes from. It's not, don't get me wrong, the cost to go to the American Library Association conference is absurd. It is for an individual. I think I went to PLA, which is the Public Library Association conference in Nashville last February. Like I was there the Sunday before the tornado hit.
Okay.
And the cost for me to go just to register as a member was something like $585.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That was the registration for one person as a member. A non-member was more, or maybe that was the non-member and mine was like $40 cheaper. Whatever it is, it's a ridiculous amount of money. And that's not even how they fund the conference. It's through the exhibit hall and the vendors paying all that money to be there. It's
just not, I mean, times are a changing.
Yeah,
I mean,
they've got to change.
I think that the whole COVID situation, I think that just accelerated changes that were already happening. I think that accelerated changes in consumer behavior. Everybody was already buying online.
Yep.
But that was the final nail in the coffin that literally your grandma is buying online now.
Yep.
Like everybody's buying online that has the ability to do it. They're doing it.
And all the move to remote work, that started long before then, but it made companies have to do it. I will be really interested to see the statistics on companies that go back to fully in-person, on-site, rent-paying facilities. I think most of them will, but I think there's going to be a large enough to be important number that decide, nah, we don't need this building anymore. Why are we paying for this overhead when we don't need to? Our staff get to save the time for their commute. They get to save the money for their gas and oil changes and those kinds of things. and we get better productivity because there was a study. I really need to find it, and if I find it, I'll link it. If you don't see a link for it, it's because I didn't find it or forgot to go look for it. There's a study that says that when companies shift to this, it came out before COVID. When companies shift to remote work, they actually find that for the first 2 or 3 years, they see a dip in production. But companies that made it past that point saw a rise in production that was well above where they started, like significantly more productivity than before they started, because by then they've got systems in place. Their employees are used to the work from home. They've learned how to minimize distractions when they're working at home, lots of other factors. Suddenly companies are seeing 50%, 60% rise in productivity by allowing their staff to work from home.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of bonkers. Like, obviously not every job can be done from home. Like, that's not possible.
Right.
But, odds are pretty solid that if your job consists of you sitting at a desk doing things on a computer, which is a lot of the American workforce,
Yes.
not just American, it's a lot of the global workforce. If that is your job, there is a good chance that you don't need to be there.
It's exactly
anymore.
Right.
There's just no reason for it. Now, I understand some people like that separation mentally. They like to be like, okay, I'm at work now and I'm in work mode and I'm doing work things. And some people prefer to be at their home. I am somebody, if I didn't have the complete separated workspace that I do have, I would find it very difficult to do things at my house. But that is also kind of due to the nature of the things I'm doing.
Yeah.
I can't have the kids in the background yelling while I'm trying to do a podcast or trying to shoot a video. Like, I can't do that, But if I was doing graphic design or something like that, I mean, I understand that requires a mental disconnect, that being distraction free can be very helpful, but like, it's not going to bleed through into the product. Like, my kid yelled and it made the graphic change colors. Like, that didn't happen,
Right.
Or if you're working in databases and doing coding and that kind of thing. Like, I think that stuff, for those that it works for, I think having the option is a great thing.
Yep.
And I can tell you that was one of the biggest things when I went from working at the terminal, where I had an hour and a half commute both ways, to working in my backyard. It was like, you feel that 3 hours a day.
Yep.
Like, I've got 3 hours a day back.
Yeah.
Like, whoa. And you want to talk about increase in productivity? I've got 3 extra hours in my day all of a sudden.
The commute's going to be the biggest one, especially. They've already started to see the change in major metropolitan areas. Like, I think you're outside of Portland. Major area. See, I live in Starkville, Mississippi. My commute to work is 15 minutes, and that's because it's about 15 miles. You know what I mean? It's but like in New York City, they're seeing people sell off or just move out of their rentals in the inner parts of New York City. They're moving in some cases completely out of state because they're able to do their job remotely, and so they're moving to where housing is more affordable, because they don't have to commute anymore. And now they've got all this time back from their normal commute and their more affordable living, but they're still working at the same salary they were making living in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I use New York as an example. It's happening across the world, actually. But I think we're going to see, I actually think it's going to lead to this growth in rural areas of people moving in because they can, who just work remotely. Oh, this town's pretty rural, but it's got gigabit internet. Yeah, I'll move there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's what I plan on doing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in the burbs right now, and as soon as it's financially feasible for me to get out to where I have some breathing room, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go as far out as has good internet access. That's how far I'm going.
That's what I did when we bought this house last year, because I moved to Starkville last year just before the pandemic started. Started looking for housing, and it's a college town. This is where Mississippi State University is, so it's one of the 3 major universities in Mississippi. And so housing's a train wreck, because college housing and investment firms buying up property, fixing up and flipping out for either Airbnb or college rentals, it's a nightmare. We found a house far enough outside of town and right on the edge of the gigabit internet service. It's like, that's where I want to live, as far out as I can get.
Yep. That's the goal for me. I mean, but that said, I'm super happy that I have the place that I have, and I got in when I was able to get in, because I was just, it hasn't come out yet, but I did a podcast last week with Chris Benson Amps, and Brian Fallon, Gaslight Anthem. We had a 3-way fun talk.
Oh, cool.
And we were talking about the prices of everything around here. It's just ballooning out of control, because people are like living in San Francisco and they're like, I can't afford to live here anymore. So I'm going to move up to Portland, or from Seattle and coming down, or various other places. Just like, we're going to go to Portland. And it's like, man, to get a okay house in Portland on, just like a normal house.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at $600,000-$700,000 in some cases. And it's like, man, I can't afford that. I'm glad I got in 12, 13 years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's better out in the burbs. It's a little bit better, but Oregon City, where I live, is still pretty crazy. I couldn't afford my own house if I had to try to buy it now. So, I'm very thankful.
I have friends in California and in Seattle area, and we talk housing prices sometimes, because one of them is moving from northern. Well, she's in Central California. She's moving up to Washington. She's getting out of education. This year's just been too much for her. She's ready to retire from that and do something else.
I'm sure.
But so I'm hearing they're house searching, right? And the prices they're throwing out to me, and they're like looking at 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses on like a quarter acre, and they're looking at $600,000. And I'm like, do y'all want me to show you what $600,000 would get you in Mississippi? And I sent them a link of a 6,100 square foot house with 7 bedrooms, 5 baths, and sitting on 13 acres. Like, that's what $600,000 gets you in Mississippi. It's like,
yeah, not here,
no.
Man. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's absolutely crazy. But I mean, like I said, I'm happy I got what I got. I'm honestly super spoiled, as you can see behind me.
Yeah.
So I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I feel that.
I'm in a really good place. Eventually, I'd like to get some property, but if I never do, I'm okay with that too. We're super cozy. So
yeah, you're not. That's the thing, is you're not in a bad place if the moving on never happens. That's always a great situation to be in. All right.
And fortunately, like when we got this place, we were both like, this is a starter home, but if this is where we end up forever, like, I did air quotes I'm not used to looking at people when I do this, I'm very descriptive when I'm recording, but I just did air quotes, everybody. But if it becomes our forever home, it's like, plenty of space, we're good. Yeah. Like, and so if I don't get to achieve my dream of moving out to the sticks, that is totally fine.
Yeah. I saw the pictures you posted of the work you've done in the shred shed. You've got a great working space. I mean, I don't know what your house looks like, because you don't put that out there because you're smart, but but yeah, it's a great situation. It's always a good one to be in like that. So I've got one other thing I want to talk about, and then, contrary to what I normally do, but I know you do some traditional questions for your guests. I don't, because I've stolen enough of your format. But since it's you, I have some traditional questions for you that are we're gonna Mississippi-fy it a little bit. But first, have you seen yet the pedal demo tool on Thomann's website yet?
I just saw that the other day.
Holy crap!
Wow, amazing!
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's unbelievable. So for those of you that haven't seen it yet, I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. But Thomann has introduced a tool. Thomann, for those of you that don't know, it is the largest instrument retailer in Germany. One of the largest
in Europe.
Yeah. I don't know if it's the largest. Is it the largest in Europe? I know it's one of.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is.
So they have a tool on their website that is apparent that you can sync up to it, use an interface, plug into your computer in your interface, and you can play through pedals and manipulate the controls on that pedal through their website to hear what it sounds like. It's the most ridiculous, like, connected tool that I've ever seen.
Yeah. I saw that. I was like, this is so cool. It's so unnecessary, but it's also amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. And obviously they don't have every pedal on there, but they've got a lot of pedals. They've got a lot of stuff available.
The demo I was watching was they had a Keeley Caverns, I think they were running through, and you can select tracks that they already have, or you can record your own direct in. They even have a built-in speaker emulator that you can change the different speakers and upload your own IRs.
Yeah, it's bonkers. It's completely
it's
insane.
So cool.
I think it's
so cool.
If it takes off, that's going to rewrite what pedal demos do in a way. I mean, people are still going to want to see live people play a pedal, but that's going to change the accessibility of hearing it for ourselves and turning it ourselves. I no more me watching a YouTube demo or turning knobs and like, no, this setting, change to this setting. I need to hear this, and
what I could see this happening really easy, like for that exact situation. So if this takes off, hypothetically, I could see the YouTube demo guy doing his or her demo, and then putting out the dry track.
Yeah.
Like if you were like, oh, I loved what you did right there, but I want to hear it when it's maxed out wet, or whatever the case may be, which they didn't do.
Right.
Like they could put out the dry track along with their demo. You can grab that, upload it to the Thomann website, manipulate it exactly like you wanted to hear them do that they did not do in the demo. And boom, there's so many possibilities.
It's so bonkers. It's so cool, and obviously it's the first thing like this I've ever seen. So it only goes up from here and gets better from here. So I don't even want to know the R&D that went into getting that tool developed. I don't want to see.
Yeah, we should probably clarify something. It's not an emulation. Or a plugin of the pedal.
Right.
It's the actual circuit.
They've got the pedal plugged in and get the sound, according to what I saw on the site. Mm-hmm. It's completely nuts. Go check it out. I'm gonna remember to put the link down here because this is just too cool. Yeah. I think it's gonna rewrite the game for testing pedals for those that can't get to music stores, or like, for example, I don't have a JHS dealer within. I think I've got to drive an hour and 45 minutes to the nearest JHS dealer, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't try JHS pedals, or heck, I've got to drive an hour just to get to the nearest Fender dealer from where I live now. So that just is what it is. But I can go online and test out these pedals. It's really, really cool. Instead of, again, hearing some demo artist do it, which there are some really, really great men and women out there doing demos, but sometimes you need to hear the way you play through it. And nobody's doing that, especially as I am a blues and roots player, and apparently blues licks are frowned upon on YouTube. So it's a thing. So last couple of questions for you. I'm going to take your traditional questions and flip them around on you a little bit. Again, I'm going to Southern fry these questions for you. Yeah.
Love that.
So what's your favorite piece of PV gear?
My favorite piece of PV gear. Looks over shoulder. That's tough.
Yeah.
So I own a few choice pieces of PV gear that I really like, but I also know that there's other ones that I like that I do not own. Let's give a bargain basement gym that I've talked about before that I think a lot of people don't know about still. But I'm going to go with the PV Windsor.
Oh, yeah.
Head. The PV Windsor head is basically a JCM 800 with some mods to it. You can get them for about, I think I paid $260 for mine. I think they're still under $300 in most places.
Yep. If you're patient, you can get them dirt cheap.
Yep. Now, I won't say that they're like the most robust amplifier ever. They're not. But for the price of a really great pedal, you can get a really solid tube amp. Yep. And it sounds like a Marshall because it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not made by Marshall, but it's a Marshall circuit for all intents and purposes. And again, you can get them for a couple $100, in some cases. And they're big and they're heavy, but they're cheap and they sound good.
Exactly.
So we'll go with the PV Windsor.
And for those that aren't buying it, seriously, pull up the Windsor schematic and a JCM 800 schematic. Seriously, look at them.
Mm-hmm.
They're dangerously close. So,
yep.
And we won't talk about what 800s are going for now, but I regret not buying an 800 back when they were $500 in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I regret not buying an 800 when they were $800.
Right. All right. So, and in typical Blake fashion, I'm going to ask you a food question
Yes.
that does indeed cause fights, and I argue is more divorce-inducing than even your pizza question.
Okay, I'm ready.
What's your favorite kind of barbecue?
Ooh, you're right. This is a tough one. Now, I'm in a bit of a unique situation here where I have not been to all of the famous barbecue regions yet. So some of my opinions are formed upon the Portland options that we have.
Okay.
Now, that said, of the major barbecue cities I have been to and sampled multiple things at, Memphis is the main one. So I've got a pretty good understanding of Memphis barbecue for someone who doesn't live there.
Right.
And the facsimiles that we have here in Portland that of Memphis style are very, very close and very, very good. There also have been a lot of barbecue aficionados that have came to Portland and tried some of our top places and been like, wait a minute, Portland is a barbecue city? Like, we didn't know. Like, Portland has excellent barbecue because we have a lot of transplants from the South and from the most famous barbecue regions coming here and opening restaurants and food carts.
Makes sense.
That's really all there is to it. So I feel like I have a decent grasp on barbecue. And it's really hard for me to point at one style being my favorite. I like elements of all of them. I love Carolina barbecue sauce.
Yeah.
I love the Texas method of cooking. There's a lot of things that I like about each one, and really it depends on my mood. I'm trying not to be non-committal, but I really do think it depends on how I'm feeling at the moment. Sometimes I'm like, man, I gotta have that mustard sauce and just slop it all in my pulled pork. Like, I need that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, man, I need a good brisket. I need a Texas style brisket. And sometimes it's like, I gotta have them St. Louis style ribs. Like, I am gonna go to Kansas City here pretty soon, actually.
Oh, nice.
So I'm excited to sample there. But so it really depends on my mood. But most consistently, what I make at my own house is a Texas style brisket with some Carolina inspiration for the rub and the juices I inject it with. So
I gotcha. Hey, it's solid. I actually don't think there's a wrong answer to this question. I've got some friends in Memphis that would really, really fight me over this because they're going to say that Memphis is the be all end all, and it's great. I'll give my opinion. I didn't answer the other one, but that's okay. But I love Texas style barbecue, but with Carolina style sauce. Like,
yeah, man.
That's just the way it goes, man. It's
so good.
It is so good. I'm a beef. I like beef. Like, if I'm going to do pulled pork, that's fine. And I want the slaw and the whole 9 yards. But for me, it's like beef brisket with vinegar-based sauce. And just, I got to have it. And so.
Man after my own heart.
Well, Blake, I've been
There's
pumped to
one more thing.
Oh, one more.
One more thing that I don't think gets talked about in the barbecue conversation enough, and I almost forgot myself. There's another style that deserves some love. Korean.
Yeah.
Korean barbecue. Legit Korean barbecue. It's a different thing altogether. I mean, not even altogether.
Yeah.
But, like, the vibe is different.
It is very different, but it is fantastic. It's
very good.
I have to travel to find it. I've only had it in Chicago. I wish I could remember the name of the place, but that was 12, 13 years ago, so I do not remember. I've had it in Chicago. In fact, I'm not sure I've had it anywhere else since then. But I remember it leaving a distinct impression when I got to have it. It needs to be mentioned.
Yep, it's really good, and I've never been to Seoul, but literally everybody that I know that has been to Seoul says that the best Korean barbecue is in LA.
Really?
Which is actually really shocking, right? Like,
yeah, but it also,
I guess like the immigrants came over and they just they maybe took some elements from the American style or something. I don't know, but Gina from Maris told me that, and Andy from Sinusoid has told me that. So I don't know if Andy's been to Seoul or not. Maybe I'm getting him mixed up, but I know Gina has. So there's been a few people who told me like the best Korean barbecue is in LA, which is kind of, I'm not a big Southern California guy either as far as where I would want to stay. But the LA food scene is not to be denied.
No. So. I tell you what, I've never been to the Pacific Northwest, and it's on my list. One of the conferences that I go to, actually, I sit on the board of a national library association, and our headquarters is actually in Seattle. And sometimes we rotate the location of the conference, and it was in Tacoma a few years ago, and I'm kind of hoping it'll circle back around that way soon eventually so I can get to the Pacific Northwest. But so having said that, I've not been there. But I think the best food city I've ever been to is Minneapolis.
I've heard good things about Minneapolis. I've never been.
You've got to go. So there's a whole street, Nicolette, and I hope I'm getting this right because I haven't been to Minneapolis since 2002.
Okay.
But I'm assuming it's still this way. Nicolette is basically 17 blocks of international food.
Oh,
it's unbelievable. While I was there, I was working in the inner city with a church, and I had lots of international youth that were part of this organization I was working with, and their parents would cook for me. And so while I was there, I got to have everything from some of the best, like good, like authentic Mexican food, but I also got to have Somalian food, Ethiopian food, which is underrated. Because, there's lots of jokes about really, really poor taste jokes about starvation in Ethiopia, and it is a legit problem. But there's also some incredible food that comes out of Ethiopia. It is spicy, so you better like spice.
I do.
Oh, it was fantastic. So I think Minneapolis is the best like international food scene I've come across in the U.S. I didn't get to spend a lot of time in New York City, so I'm sure New York can compare, but you get Minneapolis, you get that without having to deal with New York. So I highly recommend it.
Nice.
Well, all right. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to let you go. And it was a blast getting to talk to you. I've been wanting to do this for a little while since I started the podcast because your podcast is one of the ones that really inspired me to go ahead and do this. You've been gracious enough to ask questions along the way when I've asked them of you. And I think that's one of the coolest things about this whole music, gear, culture, not just take a podcasting out, but then add that in. Everybody wants to work with everybody, and there's room for everybody, and everybody's really collaborative. I had Emily Harris from the Get Offset podcast on last week, and that was really a great conversation too. And
she's great.
It's a really cool community, and so I really appreciate you coming on, hanging out, talking with me. And hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime soon, and hopefully there'll be something where we can all go to it and talk gear and do stuff in person. And
yeah, that would be amazing.
Crossing my fingers, we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, appreciate y'all for watching and or listening. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Go ahead and check us out on social media. Make sure you go check out Blake and the Tone Mob down at the links below. All of his social media, podcast, Patreon, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to try to leave a specific link just to his EP so you can go directly to that episode so you can hear it for yourself. Generate your own opinions. Let me know what you think. Let Blake know what you think of it. And until next time, I'm signing off. So y'all be sure to take care of yourselves. Be kind to each other for a change. We're not good at that. and make a little bit of noise. See y'all next time.